So, true story, I spent entirely too long agonizing over how best to open this particular video, but then I remembered something truly iconic happened when I was live streaming the game in question around this time last year. So, what better way to open this video than with that classic Tess quote, "Oh, there's trees!"
I like that, just all of a sudden, oh,
I'm crying. I am crying.
Are you okay?
No. I can't breathe. Oh my god.
Please breathe.
I can't see. Hello everyone, I am Tessellating Hexagons, and let's take a moment, shall we, to remember one of the most undeservingly underappreciated entries in the main Legend of Zelda canon. Okay, so Skyward Sword largely hinged on the gimmick of motion controls, particularly powered by the extra precision supplied by the Wii Motion Plus accessory. That alone doesn't make it a bad game, but then again, if that was the only criticism people had with this game, then this would be a very short video indeed. So, well, fine, whatever. In that case, let's have a proper feature-length discussion about this rather maligned Zelda offering and see what the critics got right and what might not be so bad after all, because, yeah, there's some good stuff in here, bear with me. In short, I plan on being Skyward Sword's down-to-earth shield, so to speak. I'll see myself out. Before we get to the main meat of the discussion here, let's lay out some groundwork, as I always do, in the form of some fast facts. Surprising exactly nobody, The Legend of Zelda Skyward Sword is a first-party Nintendo title spearheaded by Nintendo's very own head of Zelda, Mr. Eiji Aonuma, with Hidemaru Fujibayashi in the director's chair for this project, intended to celebrate the franchise's 25th anniversary back in 2011. In case you couldn't infer from what I've already said about the game's motion controls, it was released for the Nintendo Wii, with some releases also including an audio CD featuring some live performances from the Legend of Zelda 25th Anniversary Symphony to further hammer home both the series' history and the fact that this game, much like Super Mario Galaxy, had a fully orchestrated soundtrack. Honestly, I thought that bonus disc just came as standard since, I mean, I have one, but no, it even says right there on the box, not that you can particularly see with this camera, but still, that it's a limited special edition bonus, so, Well, anyway, for once, Europe hit the jackpot with this game, seeing its release almost a week before the rest of the world, receiving the game on the 18th of November 2011. North America would then get it 2 days later on the 20th, and Japan 3 days after that on the 23rd, with Australia coming in last, as usual, on the 24th. Seriously people, is a global release date really that hard to coordinate? It's insulting. Then again, as a European, this is one of the few times where that actually didn't shaft me for once, so on second thoughts, sucks to suck, America! So what's this game all about then? Well, gimmicky control scheme aside, it's really a standard Zelda game as it was intended to be, as a follow-up to Ocarina of Time, Majora's Mask, The Wind Waker, Twilight Princess, etc. In it, as ever, we follow Link, a young swordsman, on his quest to travel to various locations, fight monsters, explore dungeons, and, in one form or another, save the day. This particular entry in the series is set at the very dawn of the chronology of the entire franchise, and so is intended to set into motion the events that recur in the premise of every other game in the series. This offers some explanation, at least, as to why Link's hometown in this game is the village of Skyloft, located on a floating chunk of land in the sky amidst several smaller sky islands. Trust me, there's lore reasons for that. Lore that means that this would not make any sense at any other point in the timeline. Despite a foundation as interesting and off-piste as that, the main action of the game actually takes place on the surface world below, with Skyloft acting as more of a hub in between dungeons, where most of the game's cast actually resides, while the sky that surrounds it is sort of a little bit like a new iteration of the Great Sea from The Wind Waker and Phantom Hourglass, or like New Hyrule in Spirit Tracks. Anyway, our hero's motivation for bouncing between Earth and Sky so frequently is, ultimately, to rescue Zelda from the clutches of some burgeoning evil force, so just another day at the office for Link, really. The difference this time, however, is that Zelda isn't a princess at all. She's just Link's childhood friend and maybe his romantic interest, who just so happens to be the daughter of the headmaster of Skyloft's Knight Academy. So he's the king and she's the princess in all but title, really. That's a good analogy for the game as a whole, really. Functionally, just another Zelda game, but given a new coat of paint, and I mean that in a good way. Things look different at first glance, but start playing and it's all too familiar to any seasoned player with the right amount of newness sprinkled in to keep the experience fresh. Alright then, if it's functionally The Legend of Zelda Episode 6, depending on which games you do or don't count in the sequence of games that follow this formula, then why has it earned the infamy that it has? Well, let's start by looking at what the critics of the game were right about after all, because I might be about to defend this game, but I have no intention of lying about the points where it falls short. The key word that keeps coming back when it comes to criticisms of this game, at least once you get past all the people who couldn't wrap their heads around the motion controls, which is a point I'll come back to in a little while, by the way, but the word they keep coming back to is repetition. And depending on what kind of scale you're taking that description on, I am inclined to agree. The game's world isn't as large as it first appears, and that becomes apparent painfully quickly. In not so many words, Skyward Sword is a big fan of the number 3. Everything in it seems to come in threes: areas, dungeons, quests, and, most importantly for this point in the discussion, acts in the story. See, the world of the game is split up into 3 main areas, almost elemental in nature, named after the goddesses that recur within the Zelda mythos. We've got Faron Woods, named after Faror, Eldin Volcano, named after Din, and Lanayru Desert, named after Nehru. And you visit each of those 3 areas once in each of the 3 acts of the game, and those 3s get stale pretty quickly. To summarise, the 3 main acts of the game are locate Zelda, create the Master Sword, and learn the Song of the Hero. Each leads into the next, and the last one leads into the story's endgame. The problem is, it's commonly agreed that that 3rd act is nothing but padding and could be completely cut from the game, and while it does do some creative things to stay fresh, I completely see where the naysayers are coming from. See, by that 3rd act, the game really does start to run out of steam. In Act 1, you're arriving in each area for the very first time, so it holds back just a little so as not to overwhelm you, while still retaining the thrill and novelty of being introduced to the game's world. In Act 2, you take on a so-called Silent Realm challenge, more on that later, which encourages you to reimagine your understanding of each area, and then an extension of each area opens up. So there's some familiar stuff, and some completely new stuff that expands on it, so each area doesn't double in size per se, but it does expand. Come Act 3, the game can't really get away with doing that again, but it can't just do nothing, so we get this comparatively weak middle ground in which an event takes place in areas we're already familiar with, in the form of an underwater collectathon that everyone in the world seems to hate apart from me, a god-awful and ham-fisted stealth section that vastly outstays its welcome, on top of rehashing the same rules by which the Silent Realms work, and a relatively underwhelming parkour challenge coupled with an extended side quest that literally breaks the game. No, really. Act 3 of the game at least has the decency to let you take on the revisit of each area in whatever order you choose, after Acts 1 and 2 rigidly locking you into a specific sequence. But if you choose to revisit Lanayru Desert first, the game ends up soft-locking and entering a completely impassable state, rendering your save file completely impossible to finish. True, Nintendo did release a downloadable patch in the form of a Wii channel to fix any bamboozled save files, but once that corner of the Wii shop goes down for good, any games left unpatched will remain thusly forever. And the reason why this happens leads me on to the second problem that sets off people's padding alarms. During Act 3's reprise of the Faron Woods area, Link is unable to land in the forest proper due to plot convenience, meaning that he has to land in the adjacent sealed grounds instead, mirroring his first ever descent to the surface world earlier on in the story where he had to do the same thing. Once here, he's forced to fight a gimmick-heavy story boss called the Imprisoned in order to advance the plot, or else he can't advance into Faron Woods and complete its Act 3 story arc. There are 2 problems with this. Firstly, the Lanayru Desert Act 3 reprise requires Link to come back to the sealed grounds for other story reasons, and so this boss battle conflicts with that side quest, causing the save file jumbo juice. Secondly, and more irksomely, this boss battle is the 3rd of its kind. And I don't mean to say that it's the third boss in the game. No, it's the third time Link fights the Imprisoned. It's the third time you fight it in person. I don't mean this in a plot sense, I mean literally, this is the third time in the game's entire gameplay that the player has to go toe-to-toenails with the Imprisoned. And what makes it worse is, the second encounter with that creature was right at the end of Act 2. Think about that for a moment. Act 2 closes with fighting the Imprisoned for the second time. In order to not softlock your save file, you basically have to open Act 3 with Farron Woods. Farron Woods' Act 3 reprise opens with fighting the Imprisoned. Yeah, as if it wasn't bad enough that you have to face the same boss 3 times, albeit with slight tweaks and increased difficulty each time. The fact that 2 repeats of this boss occur back to back, enforced by a sleight of hand regarding your illusion of choice over the matter, just exacerbates the feelings of repetition and padding. So, yes, this is bad design. Absolutely no arguments from me there. In a vacuum, that sounds pretty cataclysmic, doesn't it? Like the game is beyond defense because of that technical blunder. Well, I propose that we take a step back and consider this. According to everyone's favourite database, howlongtobeat.com, the overall game takes an average of just over 38 hours to beat, or just shy of 27 if you're rushing to the finish line, and nearly 4 whole days if you're a completionist going at a leisurely pace. This is by no means a small game, and Act 3 as a whole does not take up 1/3 of that total time, not even close. At that point in the story, the game knows it's running out of resources and running out of time before the endgame, so what we get is nowhere near as complex as Acts 1 and 2, so if anything, Act 3 is somewhere between 20 and 15% of the main story, and perhaps not even that much. All of that is to say, I think the hate people have towards the third act of the game is more than a little bit exaggerated in my opinion. I never minded the Tadtone side quest in Farron Woods. Lanayru Gorge and its associated side quest was a fun, world-building, world-connecting, think-outside-the-box puzzle. The stealthified version of Elden Volcano? Okay, I admit it sucks something chronic, but on a game design level, it is valid, it reappropriates the level geometry in a clever and original way, and fighting the Imprisoned a third time wouldn't actually be that bad if it wasn't so close to the second fight. Though, come to think of it, if they just removed the second fight but not the third, that would probably balance things out quite nicely, all things considered. And now, since I can't really think of anywhere else to slot this thought in, I just want to point out something with the motion controls. They work. They do work. They work brilliantly. A lot of critics of the game utterly slam its reliance on the gimmick of using the Wii Motion Plus so heavily, much like its contemporaries of the time did, you know, like Wii Sports Resort. But here's the thing. In my experience, when someone complains about motion controls not working, 90% of the time it is the fault of the player and not the game. I've literally never had any trouble with the game's controls myself, and the only people I could imagine legitimately struggling with them at all, aside from children and the motion impaired, obviously, like, not counting that sort of person, the only people I could imagine struggling with this are those disgusting, half-assed games journalists who couldn't give a flying cogero about their jobs. You know who I'm referring to, the whole Cuphead tutorial debacle, for instance. So, if you struggle with the controls of this game, just take a moment to consider, for all of our sakes, is it the game? Or really, be honest with yourself, do you just need to get good? Moving on, I do want to acknowledge just how cleverly this game's world is designed. I will concede that the Sky Islands in the Sea of Clouds miss out on a metric ton of potential by largely being so devoid of content, but unless you're going for 100%, you have no reason to visit most of them, so don't let that bother you. Rather, let's look at where most of your experience will be taking place, the surface world. As I touched upon before, each area opens itself up gradually each time you visit it in the story, so as to ease you into an area before adding new stuff onto it. By itself, that is good design, iterative expansion. Now, on your second main visit to each area, your first port of call is to take on a Silent Realm challenge, like I mentioned earlier, which awards you a prize that allows you to get to the expansion of whichever area. These take the form of stealthy collectathon missions against the clock, and while I hate them, I love that I hate them because they're so well designed. For one, they're utterly laden with atmosphere. When you're being pursued by the guardians of the area, who can and will kill you with a single blow, you feel pressured, you feel oppressed, and you feel like you've genuinely made a mistake that justifies this extreme reaction. Incidentally, it's also a good analogy for what social anxiety feels like IRL, but time and a place for that discussion. And when you're not being chased and everything is serene and lovely, you still feel uneasy because you know how fragile that serenity is. It's like a dream where you have to run but you can barely move. Between the music, the color palette, and the obstacles you'll face, they absolutely nail that aesthetic. And I bring those challenges up here and now because they don't take place in some isolated otherworld. No, the stage on which these challenges play out is the area in which each challenge is found. That is to say, each of the 3 main areas of the game, Faron Woods, Eldin Volcano, and Lanayru Desert, as well as, much later on, even Skyloft itself, are all repurposed into this collector stealth challenge without the area geometry changing at all, save for a few ethereal walls erected just to stop you from going out of bounds, obviously. They didn't have to change anything about the level geometry at all to make these challenges work. Let that sink in. That is legitimately good design, repurposing an area designed for one thing to be used for another thing that it wasn't designed for, but that it still works. I can't even grammar correctly, but that's such a clever use of game. The other thing that I hear criticised the most about this entry in the series is Link's companion, because much like the Doctor from Doctor Who, most of Link's incarnations are accompanied by a companion or two, ranging from an annoying fairy to a sassy fairy to a talking hat. Yep, that happened. Okay, well, this time we have a sentient sword. A sentient sapient sword. A sentient sapient Skyward Sword. The spirit that inhabits Link's sword is this strange blue entity who calls herself Phi, and yes, it is canonically pronounced Phi, not Phi like the Greek letter. The Japanese version of the game spells it like this, which is equivalent to the English spelling F-A-I. For some reason, there are people out there who are stupid enough to take that to mean that F-I must be pronounced Fei because they can't understand how Japanese spelling works, and again, you're objectively wrong. It's Phi, that's the only option, end of discussion. Semantic pedantics aside, Phi is, according to the fandom, up there on the list of Link's most annoying companions, since in this particular case, instead of being rude and sarcastic like Tattle in Majora's Mask, or cheeky and laid back like Midna in Twilight Princess, Phi is deliberately and incredibly mechanical, frequently giving out raw statistics and percentages in reference to, well, I was going to say your odds of winning, but just in reference to literally everything. And people find that unfeelingness, that mechanicalness to be overbearing at times, but unsurprisingly, I suppose at this point, it doesn't bother me in the least. I know it's not much of a defense to say, hey, it's completely in character and makes sense diegetically in context for her to be the way she is with so deliberately little nuance, but it's kind of true. I suppose the only concession that I have to make is that the writing team perhaps weighed her character heavily in favour of narrative and diegesis without considering if her constant chiming in with anything from meaningless numbers to outright stating the obvious might make the gameplay drag a little. Again though, that's one little gripe that you might have with the game, and I urge you to look past it. Not turn a blind eye to the game's faults just because it's a game that I happen to like by any means, but just, it's not like the other games in this series don't have similar faults that we're willing to overlook just because the rest of the game is good, so why so harsh on this game in particular? I almost feel like I'm talking in circles a little bit here though. In short, when you really get down to it, this game doesn't do a single thing majorly wrong, it just has a lot of little complaints that add up. But I don't see why this game's minor complaints add up to this level of dislike or apathy on the part of the fandom. Reality check, the story is a solid, respectable entry in Zelda lore that addresses several points that become important in other games. It's one of the few titles where obtaining the series icon the Triforce is actually both possible and necessary to the plot, and the area design is beyond competent in both the overworld areas that later become Silent Realms, and later still get recycled in a further different way each for Act 3, and in the dungeons themselves, which I didn't even get to talk about in this video because there's not much to say beyond they're good, they're clever, and they make good use of the game's arsenal of items in accordance with the Zelda formula. So simply put, it's a solid game. So, in short, we've got a good game on our hands that absolutely does justice to its series, especially as a celebration of that series' 25th anniversary. A lot of love, care, and dedication went into crafting this game, and it does annoy me that people dismiss it so easily just because of a few minor issues that are complained about so loudly by other people. That being said though, I think the game does merit a rank C when all is said and done. Still a pass, certainly that is a good grade. It's just not the greatest game of all time. And that is simply because, while it's entirely possible to pardon the game's occasional slip-up, because realistically those problems aren't world-ending, immersion-breaking, or unfun, the game does stumble towards the end. As I said, they could easily remove the second fight with the Imprisoned to better improve the flow, or just outright remove Act 3, and it wouldn't be to the game's detriment, and let's not forget the soft-locking issue with Lanayru Gorge. But despite that, even with Act 3 fully intact to make the story last longer and to give you more content, I would still argue that the game is very much worth the price of admission, worth the investment, worth playing. It has problems, I won't deny, but those problems don't ruin the game by any stretch of the imagination, and they certainly don't outweigh the problems that other Zelda games happen to have. So don't let the echo chamber of the internet cloud your judgment before you can decide for yourself. Give this game an honest go. It's not as bad as they want you to believe. But those are just my thoughts on the whole thing. By all means, if you have anything to add to the discussion, that's what the comment section is for underneath the video, or wherever YouTube decides to put it in the future, because goodness knows they're always changing without anyone's permission. For now though, I have to sign off, as is tradition, starting with that routine shout of genuine, sincere, honest thanks on my part to the lovely people on patreon.com/TessHex, whose care and support brought this video to life. And in return, they got to see it a whole month before anyone else, with no ads, amongst other various perks, including bonus videos, outtakes, and, of course, access to the patrons-only channel on my Discord server. By all means, if you want to join the family, I would very much appreciate it. There's information in the iCard on this video, for example, but it has to be your decision, and I respect that. In the meantime, though, as ever, I have been, and will continue to be, Tessellating Hexagons, and I hope you can join me for another video like this one sometime very soon.